I'm going to give us a couple more minutes. I do know of a few folks who said they were coming that I don't see on here yet. But just to kind of get us kicked off, the book tonight is The Clot Thickens, The Enduring Mystery of Heart Disease by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. I'm going to take these goofy things off because I can't see as well, but I do recommend protecting your eyes from too much screen light. This was a really interesting book to me. I think many of you may know that my husband, John, actually had a pulmonary embolism at the end of, in September of 2024 and passed away. And hello, Karen. It is so good to see you. I have missed you. Hope you had a nice holiday. I hope everyone had a nice holiday. Anyway, I was just getting started saying the book tonight is The Clot Thickens by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, The Enduring Mystery of Heart Disease. And it was interesting to me. I actually was attending the ACRES conference in Wisconsin, December 1st. And a woman came up to me and handed me a piece of paper after my talk. And this was one of the books she had written on it. And then she had written down the names of two other books by a physician named Dr. Niepers. I have to see what his first name is. Hans Nieper, Niepper. And I have just gotten the Nieper books. One of them I'll say is probably way too technical. And so we probably won't read that, but the other one we might add to the list. But next month, we actually are doing Dr. Michelle Perrot's book, and I met her at the ACRES conference. So I went to ACRES, which is a farming conference. So you're like, okay, why is she at a farming conference? I know a lot of you know that I also work with Raul on the agriculture side with our ancient organics. And I was doing a presentation on glyphosate and all the damage, but how microbes can actually help us clean up the mess on the agriculture side and on the human side as well, because, you know, we know with our sugar shift probiotic and our lactobacillus plantarum that we can break down and remove glyphosate. And in our ag side, with our paleo power product, we see the same thing in soils. So that's what I was up there talking about. And Dr. Michelle Perrot is a pediatrician out in California. I'm not sure she actually practices anymore, but she does a lot of talks. And we're doing her book on, I think it's called Why Our Children Are Getting Sick. And that was, I got to have dinner with her, which was just a great pleasure and such an amazing woman. And so she is actually going to join us on one of the Sugar Shift Challenge calls. We're going to do her book in the book club, but then she will join us the following week on the Sugar Shift Challenge call. So we'll get, you know, a little bit broader audience, because this is typically a smaller group than what we get. Although it's not going to be called the Sugar Shift Challenge anymore. So I need to quit calling it that. We've actually changed the name to the BioticQuest, or the Community Learning Lab by BioticQuest, because we do so many other topics, and it's really more a educational platform than it is, you know, it started out as just trying to help people walk through the transition using Sugar Shift. But it's really morphed into a much larger educational platform. And so that's why we're changing the name and the logo, with me in my little white lab coat as a cartoon character. So you'll see that coming out. But I don't know how many people actually read the book. as you can see, maybe you can see, you know, when I read books, like nobody's going to buy them from the used bookstore because they're, you know, they're covered with my writing and my, you know, my notes. I wonder what's going to happen to all these books when I'm gone and all the information that's in them. But as I was saying, this was of particular interest to me because my husband had a pulmonary embolism. And at first that didn't make any sense to me, but over the last year and a half, since that happened, I've learned a lot more about what we call the glycocalyx, which is the fuzzy layer that surrounds all of our cells. It coats our blood vessels, and it is that protective layer that has kind of like a seaweed, if you will, of sulfated polymers that come out of it. And that is what is making that, it's like a filter, if you will, letting oxygen and nitrogen into the blood and taking CO2 out. And you know, when the barrier is intact, it is keeping blood from crossing over and spilling out, bleeding problems, but it's also keeping pathogens and debris from getting into our blood. So it's a very important layer. And so one of the things why the woman had recommended this book to me is because this gentleman actually talks about the glycocalyx in here. And what I will say is he does understand it in terms of its impact on the cardiovascular system. I don't think he has the deeper understanding that it actually lines everything in the body. So the earliest research on the glycocalyx, and really what's the pioneer for the last 30 years, has been Dr. Hans Vink. And most of that work has been done on the blood vessels and the cardiovascular system. But what Dr. Ninham, who I've been working with on a Parkinson's paper we have in review, he published a paper early last year that this glycocalyx is actually kind of like a neural network that coats the entire body. And that's kind of one of the communication superhighways, I'll say, of how everything gets handled in the body. I mean, that might be an oversimplification, but so I don't know. Is there anybody on the call tonight that read the book besides me? You're on mute, Chris.
I read parts, and I particularly read the part about that you noted on raised blood pressure through to understanding the relationship between potassium and salts, different kinds of salts, that we need at least 3 different types of salt. And I thought that was really fascinating, and I really wanted to ask you about that. But I did not read it. I did not.
Well, the potassium sodium part of the is also interesting to me because it is foundational in our Parkinson's paper, the disruption of sodium and potassium.
Really?
So generally speaking, the inside of a cell is supposed to be 98% potassium.
Yeah.
And outside the cell, it's supposed to be 98% sodium. And when you start spilling potassium out into the extracellular space, when the membrane isn't holding its structure or that membrane is leaking, this is where you lose signal propagation, because the difference between sodium and potassium and keeping those separated is what gives you that electrical gradient that sends the signal to your brain for movement, for pumping.
Oh gosh, yes.
For all of that. So when you start to essentially lose structure, that coherence of your structure, through glycocalyx damage, then you start spilling potassium into the extracellular spaces, and the body fights to maintain homeostasis in the blood, but out in the tissues, you can have a lot of other chaos going on.
Right. So when in Barry's, now is that paper available to us that Barry wrote about this potassium sodium relationship? I mean, that's certainly a well-known relationship, but the relationship to Parkinson's and
that paper is in review at Advances in Colloid and Surface Science, which we hope, we know it was sent out to 2 reviewers, but it was sent out right before the holidays. So we don't know who's reviewing it or how long that's going to take. And it's, frankly, it's a 70 some odd page paper. So whoever got it to review, it's not going to be a light read for them. So
right. No, okay, yeah. I guess I was referring to Barry's paper that Hans Vink was focused on the vascular system and its relationship to the glycocalyx, and then I thought you said that Barry Nimmin expanded that concept in a paper a few years ago.
That one is available. Let's see. I can actually just post the link to that because it's open access.
Okay, great.
So I'll put that in the chat if I can find where the chat is. Here's the chat. So there is a link to that, and it does go into what are called specific ion effects. So I don't want to go way down a chemistry hole for people and then go cross-eyed and say, I'm not going to listen to this anymore. But essentially, a lot of Barry's work is around how different ions. So a lot of times when people look at electrolytes, they look at the charge, is it +1 or +2 or whatever, and that's how they think about how it interacts in the system. But Barry's work is around what are called specific ion effects, or something called van der Waals and Lifshitz forces, which they're weak forces at a distance, I'll say. And they have to do with the hydration layers in the structure. So, and all of that is affected by the glycocalyx, which is a very hydrated layer. So it's made of hyaluronic acid. The glycocalyx is hyaluronic acid, and then those long seaweed-like hairs that come off of it are made of chondroitin sulfate, heparin sulfate, and keratin sulfate. So I could go way down some rabbit holes that I won't do because I'll make people's eyes cross. But, this was also interesting to me because, we're bombarded with cholesterol as the bad guy.
Right.
And, this is one of those books that's talking about, cholesterol. It's kind of like if there's a fire and there's a fire engine at your house, the fire engine didn't cause your fire.
Right.
And the cholesterol is coming in. So one of the things that was also pretty interesting to me is it talks about when the glycocalyx gets damaged in a blood vessel, red blood cells come to the area of damage for repair, and then it gets coated over with cholesterol. So that was interesting to me because when you coat over those red blood cells with the cholesterol, that's going to be a hypoxic environment. There's not going to be any oxygen in there. And there's another researcher who had actually shown that red blood cell can basically de-differentiate out of being a red blood cell and turn into a stem cell and become something else. And so that's, I actually have a question out to a stem cell researcher friend of mine, is like, is it possible that those red blood cells that go to the blood vessel could actually be attempting to differentiate into endothelial cells to repair damage that part of the vessel? So but he goes through a lot of the factors that increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, and many of those are damaging the glycocalyx.
Many of the protocols, like maybe the drugs or the restrictions with the salt or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you go on a very restricted low salt diet, that has implications in the glycocalyx as well. So potassium and sodium in particular have very dramatic effects on, the stretching out and shrinking down of the glycocalyx. But, his arguments, I have some notes here. Our arteries are basically actively protected surfaces. So that's what we're talking about. It's coated with this fuzzy layer. And when that layer gets damaged, there's active movement to the site to repair that damage. And that, when it gets damaged, it triggers inflammation, because inflammation is what pulls those cells over to try to repair the vessel. But it also activates platelets and fibrin, and that's this clotting. And the clotting, the whole mechanism of clotting in the body is, it is a finely tuned and orchestrated process. If you think about like how complicated that is, there's actually, I don't know if I can find it. I'll see if I can find it. Dr. Ben Edwards wrote a blog on the clotting system in one of his emails, maybe 6 months ago. And he was just talking about how magnificently balanced and imperfection this system is, because like too much in one direction, you've got a clot, that's a problem. Too much over in the other direction, you're bleeding. And you have these clotting factors and anticoagulant factors going on. And this was actually something that I learned a great deal about, but not enough, I'll say, after John passed away, because when we first got to the hospital with John, they told me he had something called disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, DIC. I had never heard of it. Have you ever heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's essentially clotting and bleeding out at the same time. So you use up all your clotting factors, and there's nothing, and and most people don't survive it, which John did not, but most people don't survive as long as John did. And they don't really have a good answer for why that happens if you start looking in the literature. So, and that's what sort of led me deeper into the glycocalyx with Barry and trying to understand, how these structures, how important these structures are to our protection, and how they're implicated in, all chronic disease. But, these risks we have can be mitigated through, taking care of the glycocalyx and understanding how kind of the pieces of the puzzle work.
So Martha, what were the other main, I read the section where he was addressing the importance of the ratio of the sodium and potassium and how that related to stomach issues with PPIs, and all really interesting. What were some of the other differences in his protocols, or were they just constant?
Well, I mean, some of them are pretty common sense. Like, we all know that smoking is a risk. But, he talks about diabetes as a risk, but I think one of the missing pieces of the puzzle there that I'm actually was listening to a podcast earlier today, electromagnetic frequencies and light, different light spectrum can, like a cell phone can increase your glucose and insulin levels just by having a cell phone here beside you.
Wow.
And I did know that a little bit. I had been looking at it in terms of CGMs, because CGMs have Bluetooth and they're measuring glucose oxidase, but that's a frequency that's going to elevate that's going to potentially elevate your glucose. Chronic stress. And that was really, if I go back to Dr. Ben's blog post where he was talking about these clotting factors, he was talking about like being at peace, because the peace pillar is one of the main things that he teaches is, how to be at peace and not let all this craziness, drive us nuts, which is, hard to do. Karen's got her hand up. Karen, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, it's just trying to manage Teams, how you unmute in Teams versus how you unmute in Zoom versus whatever. Anyway, it's
Stressful.
it's a muddle. It's a riddle. So I do have a comment. Martha, when you tell us that we don't have to read the book, I kind of take you seriously. So I did not read. I didn't actually know about the book until today. I came on hoping to learn something that I don't know anything about, literally. So, and I am learning some very interesting things. You said something. You just said that like having a cell phone kind of near you can raise your glucose levels. But people using cell phone, I mean, don't you use the cell phone yourself?
I do, and I think that is part of the problem sometimes when I look at my blood glucose and I go, why is it higher than it normally is? And actually, I've wondered, because I got a new phone, I had one of the older phones, and I got a new phone about 4 months ago. And I've had trouble with my weight since getting that new phone. And I wondered if perhaps the electromagnetic frequency of the newer phones is more intense or something. I don't know. So
because it's probably more attuned to 5G as opposed to 3G or.
Yeah, but I did turn off you can turn off the 5G antenna. But I only did that about a month ago. I only figured that out. So when I first kind of was dealing with it, I didn't think about that. And then I found out how to turn that off, and I was like, okay. But I still wonder if that new phone is, not ideal for me.
But here's what I'm wondering, Martha. If you're taking Sugar Shift, doesn't that help?
It does help. I mean, it's not, I don't have high blood sugar. But
no, I know it's all relative, kind of.
I can say also for Oh, 2 months maybe. I wasn't very regular with my sugar shift, and I've gotten back to being more regular with my sugar shift. And I definitely see a difference when I do that. You know, if I don't take it regularly, I'll notice, in a week or so, like my numbers will creep up a little bit, just a little bit. But, I think it's just part of the kind of maintenance process of staying ahead of all these factors that are, pushing stress on the body.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that.
And I mean,
Interesting.
that was one of the main drivers that he talked about.
Really?
And
Okay.
he didn't talk about the phone, but he talked about chronic stress. And if we just think about the environment we live in today as compared to 30 years ago, it is very stressful. I mean, even like, I think about the fact, okay, I live by myself out in the country on a farm, nice pastoral land outside. I can walk through the countryside. I should be peaceful. But there's so much information coming at us all the time. And I don't turn my TV on. I don't, but even with the limited amount of what I do there, the fact that I'm on the computer for work throughout the day, there's constantly, some piece of information coming at me that I've either got to choose to ignore or take a look at that takes my attention away. And I think all of that really creates this kind of low grade stress that we don't even think about. And there's, I want to think I maybe wrote a blog about this a while back. There's a researcher named Hans Selye, Selye, who did a lot of the early research on stress. And there's a guy on YouTube, I think in my blog, I put the YouTube video in there. I can see if I can find which one that was, but it might be on my Parkinson's Martha's Quest blog. But how this chronic stress just has a huge impact on all the metabolic processes in the body. And sort of back to the light thing that I talked about at the beginning, blue light exposure is very excitatory. So it elevates and raises kind of an intensity, and red light is what sort of quenches that excitatory pathway. And so if we're not getting, because we're inside so much, we're not getting that natural spectrum of the light that curves throughout the day, that's just another stressor that we have. I'm looking at the rest of my notes here. So, back to the glycocalyx for a bit, he talks about, he talked about the glycocalyx, and it's that protective sugar coating that's lining the vessels. And when it's damaged, it exposes that thin layer of endothelium. And that exposure is what promotes clotting. And because those cells are coming and concentrating in that spot to try to repair the damage. Let's see. I mean, really, stress is probably one: psychological stress, social stress, chronic fear, vigilance, and all the stress hormones, cortisol, which gets driven by all of these little stressors. And, that's also one of the drivers of glucose and blood sugar, is that, those higher levels of cortisol. He does go into chronic infections and immune activation, but he didn't really go into great detail about endotoxin. We are going to have Bill Davis on here at the end of the month on the 27th, and he's going to talk to us about endotoxin with maybe a little bit of a focus on Parkinson's, because that's one of the areas I've looked at in Parkinson's. But endotoxin is related to cardiovascular disease, to depression, to autism, MS. I mean, you go look in PubMed and just type endotoxin and some disease, and you will find that they have used endotoxin in some sort of a model for the disease, which is, pretty telling, I think. And Kendrick talks about heart disease as a chronic inflammatory condition. And, that's what I would say diabetes is as well. It's a state of chronic inflammation. So, what we want to do is those proactive things that we can do to lower our level of inflammation and lower our level of stress. He did have a list of things, and I need to find where it is at the back of the book, because the vitamin C was interesting. That's, of course, Linus Pauling was the king of vitamin C. Well, let's see. He had a list in the back. I don't see where number 1 is. Hang on. I see number 2. Karen?
Positive things you can do on page 259. Is that it?
Oh, yeah. It starts 262. Karen, you had.
Yeah. So it seemed, I guess what's occurring to me, and, just speaking from a newbie standpoint, is that because of our association with you and because of your brilliant products, we have some tools that the general population may not have to address some of this, like you're talking about stress. And I'm like, well, we have Perfect Peace. Thank you very much, Martha.
Yes.
And, so can't Perfect Peace be a tool to help with this? And I guess to me, it's like this book is talking about these issues from the standpoint of not having tools, but we have tools.
Yes. And that's a great point. And I will say, just for me personally, when we brought that out in August, that is, I say it's my new favorite. And that's partly why I slipped out of not taking Sugar Shift every day, because I was taking Perfect Peace. It was a pretty stressful period of time for me. And so I was taking Perfect Peace and focusing on that. And there's a big difference between the two, because Perfect Peace, you could feel it in, 20 or 30 minutes. I just kind of feel the edge come off. And with Sugar Shift, it's that sort of long-term guard at the gate that's keeping that endotoxin out. But, you're probably not noticing that 20 minutes after you take the capsule. So, even for me, who makes the product, I fall out of the habit of what I know is my best tool for, maintaining the guards at the gate and keeping a metabolic flexibility and metabolic balance, and, keeping my gut anaerobic.
Yeah, it just makes a huge difference. And I would throw antibiotic antidote in there too, because that seems to me that would be something that can address some of the damage that antibiotics create, just taking an antibiotic. And you know, that's the only thing I've ever heard of that can actually like pinpoint how to deal with that damage and mitigate at least some of it.
Well, and we are actually, I'm excited. We're working with Raul to do a clinical trial with antibiotic antidote in 2026. So I'm pretty excited about that. We actually are we're running a special right now, or, you know, it's a special package called the Total Gut Reset, where, you know, you start with antibiotic antidote. And a lot of people think, okay, well, I don't need the antibiotic antidote because I haven't taken any antibiotics recently. But the fact of the matter is, antibiotics are ubiquitous in the food supply.
Yeah. In the water and
in the water, if you're drinking. So I actually had some blood work done, and some of the things that came back, I was like, how am I exposed to that? Because I have this fancy water filtration system in my, you know, but I had been traveling most of October, most of November, and a good part of December. And, you know, I started thinking, well, you know, I'm out in restaurants drinking the whatever water they bring to the table, which is probably coming from the tap, and that's got, you know, probably got antibiotics and all kinds of other stuff in it. And you don't think about that. And then there are still antibiotics in animal husbandry. So if you're eating out in restaurants, you're probably getting exposed to that. So, and I'm just not going to stop going out. Like you've said, Karen, you know, we go out with our friends to enjoy ourselves, and I'm not going to psych myself out and go, I'm not going to do that. And oh my gosh, I'm eating poison, because that just makes it worse. So, you know, I'm going to go and enjoy myself and eat a meal and not stress out about it. But you're right about that, you know, being a tool. So that's one of the things I tell people is, like, you may not have had you know, a prescription for antibiotics, but there are many antibiotic things that are put as preservatives on your food. And so you can benefit by taking just a month of antibiotic antidote to kind of help that restoration process. And then we put in the ideal immunity, because it has specific targets for pathogens that we're exposed to, a lot of food poisoning related things, and then, you know, you move on into sugar shift. But
Interesting.
but some of the other tools that he talks about in here, and the first one on his list is increasing sun exposure. And he talks about it in terms of vitamin D, but I think there's more to it than just vitamin D.
you're right.
It's a signal to our mitochondria about energy. It's a signal to our body that is an indicator of stress or no stress. And in this podcast I was listening to today, when he was talking about the connection to light and potentially autism, the highest levels of autism are in New Jersey and California. And he had some data showing that both of those states had some of the highest levels of electromagnetic, like non-native EMF, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if there's anybody on here from California or New Jersey. And I wondered, California is such a big state. I was like, how can you make that, you know, that's a pretty broad statement. But, you know, my daughter's in Southern California in San Diego, and she's pretty stressed. So his second thing on the list was L-arginine, L-citrulline, and coenzyme Q10. And you know what's interesting? So Lactobacillus plantarum, many Lactobacillus plantarum, but our Lactobacillus plantarum actually produces CoQ10. And in fact, I think some of the CoQ10 you buy on the market as, you know, a standalone supplement is fermented by bacteria. But that L-arginine, L-citrulline, and CoQ10, our heart-centered formula is designed around helping. Those are basically designed to help you increase nitric oxide production. But our heart-centered product is also designed around helping through the gut bacteria to produce more nitric oxide. And it does have some L-citrulline in it. Then he talks about Viagra, which, many of us know Viagra is something else, but it actually is helpful for vasodilation, which is kind of interesting. Breathing through your nose. So this, if you're a mouth breather, I think I've talked about this on calls before, but, taping your mouth shut at night can be a really good way to kind of address this problem. But breathing through your nose, actually, when you breathe through your nose, it signals your lungs to make more pulmonary surfactant, which is what encapsulates the oxygen and nitrogen that gets delivered into your blood. So if you're not breathing through your nose, you're not making as much pulmonary surfactant. And it also moisturizes the air that comes in, where breathing through your mouth doesn't do that sort of same action. And breathing through your nose triggers nitric oxide production, where breathing through your mouth does not. So people who are mouth breathers at night can often get more hypoxic. Then he has vegetables, dark chocolate, red wine, and meat. So beets, I've talked on calls before about the beet kvass I make, which is a fermented, it's a Russian fermented beet drink. I really love it, and it helps increase nitric oxide. That beet kvass, you just cut up a couple of try to get organic, but you cut up a couple of organic beets, toss them in a glass jar, quart jar, just cut them up into fourths or something. It's nothing fancy. You put a tablespoon of mineral salt. I like Redmond's. Put a tablespoon of Redmond's salt in there, and you put a quarter cup of whey. So if you're in our yogurt making group, you'll know that's the liquid off your yogurt. If you're not in the yogurt making mode, you can buy like Greek yogurt at the store. And if you take a spoon out of it, you'll notice the next day that whey sort of settles and concentrates. It's that sort of yellowish liquid. And you put a quarter cup of the whey into the jar with the beets and the salt, and then you fill it up with distilled water or reverse osmosis water, put your top on it, sit it on the counter for 3 days. And that will ferment. And then you drink a shot of your beet juice every day, and it's great for cardiovascular health. On his list, he's got garlic, leafy greens, citrus fruits, nuts and seeds, and watermelon, which is interesting. I have a note here, or a question for myself about watermelon, because I think watermelon has a lot of mannitol. And if you've heard me talk about sugar shift converts glucose and fructose into mannitol, and that's a very interesting molecule that supports the hydration of the outside of the cell, and I think very likely supports the hydration of the glycocalyx. I haven't been able to prove that yet, but I'm working on it.
Well, interesting that hydration and watermelon they go together. It's considered one of the most hydrating fruits. I mean, that would be just from experience, you might be able to say that. But
yeah.
That it's actually doing something because of the mannitol, that's fascinating to me.
So, you think about, plants that are under osmotic stress, so a cactus, aloe leaf, those kinds of things. Seaweed is under osmotic stress because of the salt content in the ocean. So all of those have a higher level of mannitol because that helps manage osmotic stress. And a watermelon is under a lot of osmotic stress. As you think, it's like growing in the summer heat, sucking in that water and having to hold it in and not shrivel up is, it's a lot like
Right.
So, but somewhere in here, he talks about, he talks a little bit more about vitamin C. Some of those vegetables and the citrus fruits, of course, those are going to have vitamin C. But I think vitamin C, whole food vitamin C, is very underappreciated in terms of how important it is to our overall health. And that, I know one time when I talked about the bacteria and them being a factory in our gut, bacteria can produce vitamin C. And sauerkraut is actually one of the highest vitamin C foods there is sauerkraut, which most people would not know. So even just eating a tiny amount of sauerkraut with your meal is going to give you vitamin C. It's going to give you some of that acidity to help you digest your food. Going to be one of those tools that's going to help you in this.
What page is this list on, Martha?
I think it started on 262.
Okay, thank you.
It's in that chapter you mentioned. It was just a little further back.
Okay.
I have so many notes in here, and I was off down many rabbit holes. And this actually got me back to looking at, I think I have talked about this before, but John was a marathon runner. He was an athlete and a runner from the time he was in his teens. So in high school, he ran cross country. And, we want to exercise. Exercise is healthy for us. But we want to exercise in moderation, all things in moderation. And running, that pounding force, and also the excessive pressure it puts on the heart to pump. So that creates what's called shear stress. The more blood that's pumping, the more shear stress you have through the blood vessels. And that can sort of like mow down the grass of that glycocalyx over time, this constant pounding. And it's damaging to the lining of the gut, which is lined with glycocalyx, because as you're doing endurance exercise like that, you're pulling all the blood out of the gut out into the muscles to deal with the work that you're doing in running a marathon. And then what happens when you stop running is you get a rush of blood back into the vessels in the GI tract. And that causes what's called reperfusion injury. So that blood rushing back in will damage all that vasculature in the gut because there was no blood and there's suddenly blood. And, this is the same thing like when you have a stroke. There can also be reperfusion injury once that clot breaks up and blood comes back into the area. They try to manage the reperfusion of the blood. So, all of these kind of pieces where he's talking about cardiovascular disease were interesting to me because I have been looking deeply at endurance exercise for the last year, and how that drives basically insulin insensitivity and high blood sugar or dysregulated blood sugar, and why somebody who looks seemingly healthy on the outside really isn't healthy, because they're constantly putting their body under this tremendous amount of stress. And there's a health coach that I've also talked to quite a bit, and she's interviewed me on our podcast quite a bit, and she looks perfectly healthy. She's in great physical shape when you see her, but her, she's got SIBO and, problems with her gut that, can in some ways be connected to the fact that she's an endurance athlete and she swims in a chlorinated pool, and, she's doing that multiple times a week. And we don't think about those things, and how, like, we think if we go run 12 miles, today, it's going to make us in great shape, but that's not necessarily so. I mean, I'm not telling you to be a couch potato by any stretch of the imagination, but walking is going to be a lot better for you than going out and running a 10K.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have any naysayers here, or like somebody who wants to give me a hard time? Or we have a lot of quiet people tonight. No hands up. We're just easy. Oh, here we go. Dee has a hand raised. Then we'll come back to you. You have to unmute yourself. Oh.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, I run, but I enjoy hearing the conversation. It's much over my head, but I still thrive on it, and I'm so grateful, because it's such a pleasure and honor to be around people thinking like this. I live in West Des Moines, Iowa, and I teach special education. I've studied health with my books, not like your books, Martha, but my books, for years, because my mother died when I was 15, and I just finally quit studying the cancer books, but I still appreciate everything you all do. And it's funny, because to me, it's funny that I I belong to a couple of meditation groups, and very intense. Oh, Paul Selig, I enjoy, and I belong to another meditation group and so, and I love podcast, and so I just think that sometimes, I agree. I don't like the word moderation, but I'm coming to accept it, because I've always enjoyed intense fitness, and I've done a lot with that on the side of teaching. But I think that sometimes I wonder if there's something that happens in our body that science doesn't explain so clearly when we do come into a state of surrender and complete peace. And I wonder if we have the ability to reset any of these things when we learn to find a place of peace each day. And then I go out into a world where I feel like a snow globe that's been shaken. But I just wonder, with all the research, I try to kind of look at it from a high bird up in the sky, because I know in the fitness world, there are so many disorders that are hard to name around food. And that's my 2 cents. I am not pushing back. I'm taking it all in, everything you're saying.
Well, I really like the comment about meditation, finding that place of peace. I try to do that. I'm not the best at it. And I actually wrote about like the one time that I absolutely knew I had hit that place was actually when I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
And I barely breathed, and everything else fell away. And all it was one step at a time, one breath at a time. And as I was walking, I thought, this must be what the meditation gurus are talking about, because everything fell away and it was so still and peaceful.
Maybe you were in the present moment.
I definitely was in the present moment, but so I do work on that myself. I try to meditate every morning when I get up a little bit, and I do some breathing or meditation before I go to bed at night. And I will say, if I forget to do that, I don't sleep as well.
Well, I won't continue to interrupt, but I did want to say one thing. I listened to Julie Ryan, who's got a podcast. She has created medical instruments, but she's a medical intuitive now. And she interviewed someone recently. I don't know how recent. Maybe I got the interview in an old time, but she's in Colorado, and she has created this thing that's called the egg. And I've tried to go back and locate it quickly while you all were talking, but she's even worked with the, was it ALS? Was that the group you were working with in November?
Yeah.
She's even worked with them to develop a certain, I'm not going to be saying this correctly because it's January now. And all I know is that she developed this thing that brought the nervous system into a quiet place. And that ALS group, I think, had her work. She created, even though it's not named it, there's a place where for them to, and she, to quiet the nervous system. And I just know from my uneducated medical experience, for me, I need to quiet my nervous system, whether it's through the right food or through breathing, or maybe that's my incline run. I don't know, but I'm just, well, someday I'm going to exit the earth. And I guess I thank you for letting me be on and listen to the medical talk. And I appreciate all of you.
Well, thank you for coming. And you mentioned cancer books. So what I mentioned at the beginning was the woman who told me about this Clot Thickens book. I mean, she just handed me a piece of paper. She didn't even tell me her name. And she told me about this Dr. Nieper. And this book is like way technical. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, like, I'm probably not going to read this, because he's talking about stuff. It's like, okay, I got enough stuff. I don't need to get into new fields of things like tachyons. But I'm reading his other book, and it's called A Curious Man. Mm-hmm. And it's basically his life story, I think, of his cancer work. So he has, he's probably not still alive, but he had a clinic in Germany that people came to from all over the world, and he used a lot of natural things for cancer. And part of the book, I think, is going to talk about how, like here in the United States, those things were made very difficult for people to get. But he would have people who would come see him, and then, he would send their medications to them, but sometimes they would get confiscated. And so it's kind of, so I'm excited to read that, but I wanted to get I wanted to get finished with this one first, and then I have to go back and reread a couple of books or something else. And I have to read the book for next month, but I think that one's going to be interesting. And if it's interesting enough, I'll add it to the book list for later in the year, because, we always have a lot of people who are interested in cancer as a topic because
Mhm.
it continues to be. I mean, that's like both of my parents had cancer.
Mm.
And the researcher that I found who passed away in the 90s, we didn't know about her with the no internet when my mother died in 81. And I mean, we didn't have access to the internet, I would say. And she was, I can't think of her name. I didn't get rid of her books. My sister asked me to stop reading them finally after so many years, but I did keep her books. But she healed cancer with she was a physicist maybe from Austria. I don't know, but I don't know. Anyway, she healed cancer with quark and flaxseed oil by smothering the cancer cell.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have her books, and she also has case studies of how people voted in certain board meetings on products. But
What was the other thing? You said flaxseed oil, and what was the other?
she used quark, QUARK, which is similar to cottage cheese in the United States. And
Oh, okay. So that's like I can't think of the guy's name, but
you had to blend it. You had to blend it. You had to emulsify it to get the.
It starts with a B, whatever that guy's name is. But yeah, you blend the seeds and the cottage cheese. Yeah.
Yes, and it smothers it.
I once and tried it. I mean, I don't have cancer, but I thought, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to try this.
I did it for several years myself.
Yeah. It's not the tastiest thing.
Thank you guys for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Neither is that beet stuff you were talking about. I despise beets. My hell will have beets in the mouth. I'm just saying.
You don't like, well, it's funny. Growing up, I didn't like beets, but I like beets now. And I do like the beet kvass because it doesn't taste like a beet. It tastes like a tiny sour shot of goodness.
Yeah, my mother tried to sell me that line too. She was trying to get me to eat beets, and because I wanted long fingernails, she's like, "Oh, if you put sugar on the beets, the beets won't taste like beets." I'm like, "Okay." So I got all these beets. I dumped a bunch of sugar on them. They still tasted like beets.
I do remember as
horrible.
a kid. I don't know if my mom got them out of a can, but they tasted like dirt.
Mine got them out of a can. They were pickled beets. They were horrible. I can still see the package. I can smell a beet at 50 paces. There's no way I'm doing fermented beet anything.
Okay. Well, you can avoid the fermented beets, but I'll just and I eat Brussels sprouts now, which I hate it. I despise Brussels sprouts. I have this whole battle with my dad over Brussels sprouts when I was probably 8 years old, maybe 10. And my mother fixed Brussels sprouts for dinner. I think she like boiled them in water, so they didn't have any seeds, not how you get them today in some fancy restaurant. But, so there's these Brussels sprouts on my plate. And my brother had this trick where he used to, if he didn't like something, he would put his napkin up to his mouth and spit it out in the napkin and collect it and throw it in the trash. And, he seemed to get away with that. So I start collecting my Brussels sprouts in an attempt to dump them in the trash later. And my dad catches me.
Of course.
You can imagine that I was a bit of a hard-headed child. And my dad was a bit of a hard-headed fellow himself. And he basically told me that I was not going to get up from the table until I ate the Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
And I sat at the dinner table staring at those Brussels sprouts till 11 o'clock at night till he finally let me go to bed without eating the Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
But I do eat Brussels sprouts now. I don't know. Probably everybody has some kind of a childhood story of food trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, mine has to do with cream of wheat that turned into a Frisbee. And my mother was like, "You're going to eat that. You're going to eat that cream of wheat. You're going to stand there and you're going to eat it." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not eating this crap." But yes, cream of wheat. literally in the shape of a Frisbee.
You know, I wonder if people today still have those battles with their parents, like, or not. But
I think
what is the? Can you slide it that way? Okay, the
It's
oil plus protein diet.
it's this woman what passed away in the 90s, Dr.
what
Johanna Budwig.
what was
And
can
I
you
always
spell the
keep this
last name? I can't quite read it.
Budwig.
Okay.
Was an amazing person. I enjoyed, not to take away from your medical research, but for me, it helped me to read it. Thank you.
I have a question. You know, getting back to what you were saying about like the marathon running, and just the stress that that puts on your body. And I did what I did hear you say is be a couch potato.
No,
Maybe I could have sworn that's what you said, but anyway, I'm just, but you know, it's interesting that you know that I think there's a lot to be said about like the super stress that that sort of activity can place on the body, but at the same time, there's so many different outcomes with marathon runners. You know, I mean, Mark Sisson was, you know, like an elite athlete, and you know, he's living his best life and he's in his 70s. I mean, he's had a hip replaced, but whatever, you know. And they're just, and then like people from other countries, I mean, Ethiopia has this huge tradition of marathon running. And I don't know that they're suffering the kinds of impacts that people in this country can suffer from that sort of just ultra stress.
well, I wonder too. Like if you look at the runners from the African countries and the amount of sun they get, that they have better repair systems and better mechanisms for handling that stress than we do. I don't know. That's a hypothesis. I had somebody with a hand up. Diane, was your hand up? Did you?
She just left the call.
Oh, okay. Well, she had her hand up. But so I'm glad you brought that point up because I have actually been looking at and working on a blog post about this that I keep going around and around about. You know, we have these discussions about ancestral diet and being on an ancestral diet. And, you know, we didn't eat these things, you know, but I was doing some work with a group in Australia that's going to do a small trial with Sugar Shift and Revasca in the Australian Northern Territories indigenous population, which has terrible health problems since the Western diet has come in place. So I just went and tried to look up, okay, what is the ancestral diet of the Aborigines? Well, I mean, that is the most difficult place in the world, I think, to probably exist. And, you know, their diet isn't like the keto carnivore diet. You know, their indigenous diet is there's a wet season and a dry season. And, you know, they're scrounging around and they're eating tubers. So they're having carbs and they're, you know, scavenging for fish when they can. And, you know, they're eating shrubs. And I mean, there's just kind of all kinds of pieces of that diet, which goes to also a different kind of microbiome that evolved to either ferment things or not ferment things. So I started looking at, you know, what are these different population groups around the world, and, you know, the pastoral populations, which are more meat-based, but fermentation. So they were fermenting dairy and, having a daily dose of fermented foods. But there are also populations that, don't have that culture of milk and dairy and all of that. And so, you look at these different parts of the globe, the different light structure where they live, the different foods that are available to them. I mean, if you're living in the tropics, you're eating a high carb diet. You're eating fruits that, grow. I mean, you got coconuts, but you're eating a much higher carb diet because, you've got these fabulous fruits that just grow all the time. But you've got a different kind of gut and different kind of light and different kind of mitochondria. So I think this, I'm kind of looking at, because I've done some talks at low carb events, and I've been invited to talk to a plant-based diet group, and that people get angry if you bring up one or the other when you go, you have to be a super fan of carnivore keto or a super fan of plant-based, for anybody to want to talk to you. And I just kind of look at this earth and the diversity of the population and the way our we have evolved, but also the bacteria that we co-evolve with, came from these cultures that we came out of. And so I think maybe it's not that simple of an answer. And that's why some people can do a plant-based diet and can feel fantastic and don't fall off a cliff, but other people do. And some people can do keto or carnivore forever and they look fantastic, but other people do keto or carnivore and they have initial great results, and then they start having problems. Because their gut bacteria aren't designed for that as a long-term solution. So anyway, that's kind of where my thinking is. I don't know. Does anybody, what do you think?
It was interesting. It was interesting in the book that he talked about his background. Was he Scotch or Irish? Did he say?
I don't know. I know he's from the United Kingdom. I don't know.
Yes, it was North Great Britain, and he talked about how the ancestry there were just like zero vegetables, zero plants and vegetables, some root starches, but and he was saying that he thought that really had an impact on over generations. It was an interesting comment. I'll try to find it. And the other thing that I was going to mention that Dee was talking about, I think it was Dee or was it Diane? I'm not sure. Who was talking about the cancer book. She said that she was going to look more closely at the nervous system as a source of health issues. And I was listening to a podcast. The podcast is called The Perfect Stool, and it's a nutritionist health coach who
I like her.
is she's very good. Martha, you should be on that show.
I was on
wonderful.
I was on there a while, but I was listening to one recently and I was like, I really need to write her and see if she'll have me back on.
I'll write her and tell her. I think she's great. She gets really good guests. And she had a guest who was actually a nutritional therapist, who was addressing all these, basically the perfect stool is addressing all these diagnoses of the gut. And she's quite expert but really approaches it with food and chemistry. And she talks about microbes and the whole science of it. And this guest that she brought on said, I think we are overlooking the impact of stress on the gut, and that these highly stressed people, she says, not just the person who's had childhood trauma, but just the overall stress in our life, which keeps the parasympathetic from working its healing and digesting and resting. And that is compromised because the sympathetic high intensity reaction of, the proverbial being chased by a tiger is the state that we're in. And she now is addressing all the people who come to her with these bad gut issues, which that is one place people seek out a nutritionist if they have gut issues. That's where they often start. And she advises just 3 or 4 simple daily activities to do throughout the day, including breathing, doing a down dog, because that relaxes the neck muscles and activates the parasympathetic. But just simply the idea that getting the vagus nerve toned and back on board is what is needed for these, whether it's IBS or Crohn's or any number of constipation, diarrhea. She thinks that's what's being missed in the whole equation. I thought it was really interesting, and that made me think about your idea, Martha, about the marathoners who've put themselves into a state of high intensity stress, physical and emotional stress, and it's like they can't. When you have been under that level of continuous stress, 27 miles, that the body is just not taking you back to homeostasis with that as taking you out of sympathetic into parasympathetic for healing. And she had an interesting
Oh, you froze.
cue to give people. She was not in favor of high. That she offered a suggestion that if you are into high intensity working out, that you have to actually tell your body to stop, like verbally give your body the idea, and of course follow your own directions and say, the stress is over. Now I'm in rest and repair and the parasympathetic, and I'm done. I'm switching over. And she thinks that can be helpful. But the main message was, this is too stressful, that high intensity workout.
I think that is right. So it's interesting you brought up the vagus nerve, because, I've looked at the vagus nerve related to the gut brain a lot, because they have also talked about how alpha-synuclein, which is the protein that's associated with Parkinson's, can travel up the vagus nerve to the brain. And there's been some research around that, but I can't find where I was looking at this week. But actually, the vagus nerve connects to the lungs. And there are what are called these stretch receptors that connect to the vagus nerve. And so if you're not deep breathing, like, you're sending stress signals. If you're not taking that relaxing, calming breath, your vagus nerve thinks, okay, like, we're in danger. And that's another thing. Like, my husband's marathon buddies that he used to train with, they used to joke and laugh how John could, run like crazy and still keep talking and not lose his breath. But he was a very shallow breather. So I don't know if that was part of that, but he wasn't taking that full breath down into the lungs and like breathing from the belly.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
but
that idea. That idea of the vagus nerve and the lung, well, the vagus nerve goes throughout the entire body and hooks up to every organ in some way. And this presenter, her point was, okay, we're all here talking IBS and Crohn's and constipation and diarrhea and blah, blah, blah. And the vagus nerve, the stress of our modern life has affected us in that way, but it's affecting people with kidney problems, and that is maybe their weaker organ where it becomes a problem. We're all under this stress, and it affects it, heart disease, everything. She thinks this is the key. And I know, Martha, when you interviewed, one of your blogs was about the Parkinson's patients you interviewed, and it was so common that you would find that they had some very stressful event in there before their diagnosis. I don't know. I'm just hearing more. It's more stress than we're able to cope with, whether it's the EMFs or the expectation of assimilating all this information that comes at us all the time that you mentioned. I'm just hearing stress all over the place.
Well, so one of the things I sort of take away from that and take into my daily life is trying to have more grace and compassion for the people I run into throughout the day. If I'm out and about or whatever, that are agitated, or, whether it's somebody way who's, accidentally about to run me off the road, or, honking their horn, or, whatever it is. I am much more mindful now that really I have no idea what they're going through, but I can imagine that they are going through a tremendous amount of stress, and that I need to give them some grace. So maybe if we all did a little bit more of that, we'd all be a little bit less stressed.
Yeah.
It's a crazy fast, high-paced world today. Like I was thinking back. I mean, gosh, okay, 1995, 30 years ago, when I, like, before my two youngest kids were born, and, the internet was just kind of coming into being. And, I think I had a flip phone. I'm not even sure I had a flip phone in 1995, but just the amount of information that comes at me on a daily basis. And, that's probably one of the things that I could do with is just a digital detox of, saying I'm going to take 24 hours and just not connect to anything, not my phone, not my computer, not anything. But it's so hard to do in the world we live in today. And I was talking to somebody about, like, growing up, when I was a kid, your parents couldn't get a hold of you at the drop of a pen by texting you or calling you, or looking at your location to see where you are on the phone. And, we'd just be out, playing until we heard a whistle blow right about when the sun went down. And, I don't think our parents were terrified and afraid of where we were or what was going on. We have terribly overcomplicated and stressed our lives with this little box that we carry around in our pocket.
Where I grew up it was in Chicago. My parents would punish me by making me go outside, because I really like staying inside and reading and just chatting and talking to my mother, who probably desperately needed alone time, but I would hear constantly, go outside and don't come back in until the street lights come on.
That's funny. Well, you know, my youngest son, Jack, and his new wife are becoming guardians for her sister's children who are 9 and 11. And he's getting a real taste of, gosh, it sure would be nice to have some quiet time.
Yeah.
And he went through the, you know, this was their first Christmas with the kids. And, you know, they went through all this stuff to, you know, to make it a really special Christmas for the kids. But, you know, a lot of work goes into that. And he sent me the nicest text message on Christmas morning. And he said, Mom, I just want to say thank you. I had no idea what it took for you and Dad to make a special Christmas for us every year. And I just appreciate so much. And I love you. And I was like, oh, that, you know, it all
Oh
worth
my
it.
God.
You're like, about
Sweet.
time you figured that out.
That's so sweet.
That's very nice.
That was one of my special Christmas gifts.
Oh, that is a special
I guess
Christmas gift.
so. Huh.
But, you know, it is that, you know, constant somebody talking to you. So like you're talking about, your mom probably would have liked to have some quiet time. Somebody talking to you. Well, then now we have this talking to us all the time. So, you know,
Yep.
quiet the noise. I'll be doing that before I go to bed tonight. Quiet the noise.
It's
Anyway.
it's
I'm going to just pull up here Michelle's book so we can see what that is. Wow. I hope I have it right here. What's making our children sick?
okay.
So
What's making our children sick? Okay.
So here, let's see. Go back over here and share my screen. Entire screen. So this is the book. I don't know if I can shrink this down so you can see it. There we go. What's making our children sick? Convincingly explains how agrochemical industrial production and genetic modification of foods is a culprit in this epidemic. Is it the only culprit? No. Most chronic health disorders have many multiple causes and require careful disentanglement and complex treatments. But what if toxicants in our foods are a major culprit, one that, if corrected, could lead to tangible results and increased health? Using patient accounts of their clinical experiences and new medical insights about pathogenesis of chronic pediatric disorders, taking us into gut dysfunction and the microbiome, as well as the politics of food science, this book connects the dots to explain our kids' ailing health. So if you know anybody, I know most of us here are, our kids are older, or we may not have kids. But if you know anybody with, you know, young kids that they're bringing up, we will cover the book the first Tuesday in February, but that following Tuesday, we will actually have Michelle on our Learning Lab call. So, you know, please invite anyone you know. I think you can just share the link if you get the link, or they can come and register for our emails just by going to the website. There's a pop-up and they put their email in and can register, and they'll get the emails.
Martha, I'd like to throw out a book for consideration at some point. No particular rush, but I don't know if you've heard of Zeke Emmanuel. He's Rahm Emanuel's brother. Rahm Emanuel was mayor of Chicago and, the chief of staff for Barack Obama. And then another brother, Ari Emanuel, is a super agent in California. And Zeke Emanuel is an oncologist and works he's very, very well known. But he wrote this book called Eat Your Ice Cream. Eat Your Ice Cream, and it's called Eat Your Ice Cream in 6. Let me get the title. Eat Your Ice Cream. It's just called Eat Your Ice Cream, and then 6 things that you can do to have basically a 6 simple rules for a long and healthy life. That's the whole title. Eat Your Ice Cream: 6 simple rules for a long and healthy life. It's just I just think at some point it might be interesting to it's not overly technical. It's not, but it might bring up some ideas that it might be an interesting discussion given what we talk about. I don't agree with everything he says, not by a long shot, based on what I heard in the interview, but there are some, I agree with the Eat Your Ice Cream part for sure. And be a couch potato, which is one of the rules. Be a couch potato. No, he doesn't say that. No, he says exercise, but he's
I
an
did
idiot.
not say that. I want to go on the record. I did not say that. I do walk, although I will say one of the reasons why I have put on a few pounds is the weather here was so bad in November and December. It was just raining every single day when I got up. And usually the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I take a 3-mile walk down the driveway all the way down to the end of the road and back up. It's about 3.5 miles maybe. And I wasn't doing my walk every day. And you think how that sort of builds up. And then I went to Colorado with the kids for 9 days over Christmas. And when I'm here in Kentucky, I go to yoga probably 5-6 days a week. So I'm constantly doing yoga. Well, 9 days without yoga. When I came back and went to yoga class Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and yesterday, I was so sore by the time I went to the class on Monday. And I was like, man, you just don't realize how being a couch potato for 9 days can impact you. I did do some walking while I was out in Colorado, but nothing like I do just on a regular course of, and just the simple. So since I've been back, I've also been doing, just going out and walking for 10 minutes after I eat. As soon as I eat, go walk for 10 minutes. That is, because it signals to your body, okay, this food is for producing energy. Don't turn it into fat.
Yeah. Supposed to be really an effective protocol for weight management.
So anyway, I'm getting back in the swing of things, but
3 miles. That's great, Martha. You're inspiring me. I do too, but I'm ready for more.
Well, I think if I am talking about moving back to Colorado, and if I move back to Colorado, I think I'll get back more into some of the hiking groups I was involved with and doing some longer hikes on the weekends. But I just don't have anybody here to go hiking with. So
yeah,
come visit me and we'll go find a place to hike.
Wow. Okay.
That's an invite.
Yeah.
I have a little guest house right next door.
Mm-hmm. What about the food?
Well, I'm a pretty good cook.
I bet.
It's like you need to speak to me.
Now, I haven't done this in a while, but so my mother had this ice cream maker called Il Gelato.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It weighs about 50 pounds. And, when I was going through all her stuff, and of course, she didn't want me to throw anything away. And I was like, am I going to take this 50-pound thing with me back to Colorado? And let me tell you, I have brought that 50-pound, took it out there, brought it back here. I mean, you're making homemade ice cream, but you just like push a little button. So you mix up your ingredients and pour it into this 50-pound machine that sits on your counter. And you push a little button, and 30 minutes later, you have the most fabulous ice cream. When the kids were younger, we used to make, I mean, that was one of our things. Like every weekend, we would make a new flavor of ice cream. And I have lots of different ice cream recipes. But now that I'm on this, quote, health kick, I haven't been eating my ice cream, Karen.
Well, Jen hooked me up because I was complaining one day because I have a Vitamix that's like I can make the perfect ice cream whenever I feel like it. And she's like, well, you have your Vitamix and you do such a great job. I'm like, I don't feel like making ice cream, Jen. I feel like going to the store and buying a pint of ice cream and eating it. That's what I feel like doing. But they all have sugar in them. So what am I supposed to do? And so she told me about this ice cream called Rebel, which has no sugar in it. It's, zero sugar. And the carb load is like somewhere between 1 and 3 net carbs. It's sweetened with monk fruit and allulose. And it doesn't use like a lot of tapioca starch or any of that stuff. It's really good. And ironically, it's not sold in health food stores. It's sold in like Safeway and Walmart and Food Line. That's where you find this ice cream. It may Wegmans maybe. But they have like all kinds of like really cool flavors. And it's like, oh my God, this is a revelation. So I have been eating my ice cream.
Okay, I'm looking at a picture of it right here. Full fat dairy, no sugar.
How about emulsifiers?
That's what I'm looking for. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the ingredients. I'm not. Let's see.
Oh, they're definitely there. Because I read them. I'm not going to say it has the perfect ingredient complement, but it's a damn sight better than Haagen-Dazs.
I don't know though. Haagen-Dazs is only 5 ingredients. It's better
Yes,
than.
but one of them is sugar. That's the
As
issue.
a person who lived in Colorado not Colorado, in Texas for a long time, I love Bluebell. But Bluebell doesn't have a great ingredient list either.
No, and the issue with Haagen-Dazs is that it has sugar. That's the problem.
But it has just plain old sugar, and the Bluebell has high fructose corn syrup.
Oh yeah, that's But
So,
to me, sugar is also the issue.
Step above. So here we are on our little health podcast talking about grades of ice cream. I'm not gonna tell you my latest from going to the Acres conference, my latest epiphany on dairy. I'll talk about that on another. Well, I'll talk about that next week when I talk about the glycocalyx and quaternary ammonium compounds that are in our cleaners and all of that. And if you read my Substack, Martha's Quest Substack, I just put out an article about the quaternary ammonium compounds in cleaners that you can read today.
Okay, great.
Oh, yay.
So that's next Tuesday, Martha? Next Tuesday
That's next
is our
Tuesday. That's our
okay,
first.
great.
It's going to be the community learning lab, not the sugar shift challenge. I'm going to have a hard time redirecting myself to the new name. I see, but that will be our first learning lab call.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. I'm still eating ice
excited.
cream. I don't care what you say about the cleaners or dairy. I'm still
What's
eating
your
ice
favorite
cream.
flavor?
Ironically, it's the triple chocolate. I think the triple chocolate was really good, and I don't normally like the chocolate, but this tasted pretty good.
Well, over Christmas, Charlie got these tiny little. They were little bitty. It's probably 4 bites, perfect size. A little ice cream sandwich that they had at Whole Foods, and the one he got, had a very thin chocolate cookie or, you know, whatever the outside was. And the inside was a dark chocolate with chocolate chips in it. And it was,
Yum.
you know, it was perfect. But, you know, you got to have a treat every once in a while.
Or every day. I mean,
Exactly.
Dick Van Dyke eats ice cream. He eats ice cream with chocolate syrup every day. And we all know how old he is because it's impossible to miss.
Who is that?
Dick Van Dyke.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You know, some people can get away with a lot of stuff. Sort of back to the, you know, what microbiome do you have? What metabolism do you have? What are you able to deal with and tolerate? Like, I wonder how much of our problems go back to the fact that we've been doused with antibiotics and we've lost so many of the tools in our toolkit that we used to have, because people used to eat all this stuff and they weren't fat.
Right.
They were not fat.
And Dick Van Dyke was the heavy smoker before he quit, and a heavy drinker. He had to put himself into rehab. It's not like he led this pristine, healthy life. You know, he had a lot of challenges, but he's still 100.
Yeah. So I do wonder if a lot of it isn't all this electromagnetic pollution too. And that, you know, maybe we could eat some things we enjoy if we didn't have so much magnetic pollution. Anyway, let's stop the electromagnetic pollution, get off here and go do some breathing before we go to bed and relax ourselves.
Yeah, de-stress. Yes.
And although, you know, I do have to say, this is kind of de-stressing for me. I always enjoy talking to you guys. So we will see you next time.
See you
Thanks
next
for
week, Martha. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. It was great. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Happy to be here. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.